Hello everybody. Gonna try to get my comments up here so I can see. There we go. Perfect. So today what I'm gonna do is I'm going to show you what we did in my technique class this last Thursday. So this is kind of what everybody made. We had the page for our binders that had kind of little descriptions of all the different techniques and some samples. So we did 9 different techniques this time, all with embossing paste. And then we made a card and everybody kind of got to pick which technique they wanted to use for the background. So this is just kind of 2 options and I'm going to show you a different one later on. So those are 2 of our options. This is the card that we made. I'm going to show you how to put that all together. So embossing paste. It comes in these tubs and it does dry out. So you want to make sure that you close the lids tightly. There is 2 different versions. There is this non-glitter version that's kind of like icing or spackle or grout, whatever you want to compare it to. And then there is also the shimmer version. So this has kind of a glimmer to it. It has some glitter in it. So I don't know if you can see that, probably not. But there is a lot of sparkle to that. The other things that we're going to be using today, we're going to be using some re-inkers in a variety of different colors, which is of course available in all our different colors. We've got our palette knives, so these are just plastic spreaders. Basically, if you've ever worked with oil paints, you're probably familiar with them. Even if you've done any tiling and stuff, these are fairly standard tools. And then we've got some masks as well. So these are, I can't remember what they're called right now, but there's some masks. You can use any masks. They don't have to be these ones that you can order right now. You can make your own, just taking some window sheets and die cutting something from them. So you've got lots of options there. All right, so, but how do we actually use this stuff? So on our sheets here, I made just little pieces, but I'm going to show you with some bigger pieces, just so that it's a bit easier to see. So I've got some crumb cake cardstock here, and I'm going to show you kind of the basic. So the basic way to use it is just to either without a mask, or I like to have a mask so I have some kind of fun pattern on there. We're just going to take our embossing paste, and it doesn't usually take a lot when you do this. So we're just going to put a little bit on there, and then we're going to spread it across our mask. Now you can either make sure that you get it in every last little corner, or just kind of be happy with wherever it ends up. And then when you pull this up, you've got that pattern all over. Now, one thing I do like to keep handy is a microfiber, because once this stuff dries, it's really kind of hard to get out of things. But when it's still wet, you can just wipe it on your microfibers, wipe down your masks, and it'll come off. Once it dries, you can kind of soak it off and scrub it off. I've found Goo Gone or sort of similar goop removers tend to do the trick fairly well, but that is kind of the basics of embossing paste. And I'm going to get rid of some of this extra stuff on my paper so that I don't end up with glitter everywhere. Okay, next thing we can do, we can also add some color to it. So I'm going to use my silicone mat for this, and I'm going to use just a piece of white. Whisper white. And then should we do shimmer? Yeah, we'll do shimmer with this one. I'm going to do, again, just put some shimmer embossing paste on there. And then I'm going to take a re-inker. This one I'm going to use Rococo Rose, one of our new ink colors. And I'm just going to put a drop of that on there. I'm going to use the same mask again, I think. I really like this mask. And then I'm gonna just spread this around so that that color gets into and spread around that embossing paste. And again, I'm just gonna spread it, not necessarily over my entire piece of cardstock, but again, if that's the look that you want, you can totally do that. Good enough. Alrighty. So now we've got the same thing, but it has a tint to it. So that is super fun. All right, now we're gonna get real nice and messy. Ooh, now I've got embossing paste everywhere. Okay, gonna get rid of my silicone mat for now. And I'm gonna grab another, oh no, yes, I wanted another white. Okay, for this one, I'm gonna use the shimmer embossing paste again, but this time I'm gonna put it directly onto my cardstock. And for this one, I do want a fairly big kind of glob, and I'm only gonna put it along one edge. And then get rid of some of that stuff on my palette knife there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some drops of color on here. So I'm actually going to use my other ink colors. I'm going to use Blueberry Bushel, Pineapple Punch, and Lovely Lipstick. Now I've got to figure out which order I wanted to do these in. Okay, I'm going to do this one, and I'll do that one up here. I've got 2 drops, that's okay. You can see it's starting to spread a little bit. A little bit extra there. And then my Blueberry Bushel, I'm going to put down at the bottom here. Put 2 drops of that too. So I got 2 drops of each color, and now I'm going to spread it back and forth. So I'm going to spread one way and then the other, and I'm just going to keep doing this and spreading this ink and embossing paste kind of all over. I don't want to turn my palette knife, but you can see as we go that it's kind of blending into each other. So I'm getting that kind of a gradient from one to another, which is exactly what I wanted. And this is much easier on a big piece, let me tell you. We did it on the small pieces, didn't work very well at all. But you can see how we're getting that kind of a gradient, and that's just a beautiful background. Now this is with the shimmer. You can do it with the non-shimmery one as well. All right, wipe that off. All right, so that is another version of what you can do with that. Okay, the next one is going to be very similar. And this one I'm actually going to do onto this little dollar store canvas, and you'll see why. Because I actually have a plan for this, and I'm doing, along with Kara from Kara's Crafty Nook, I'm doing these online classes. So the next one we're doing is from See a Silhouette, which is one of the sweets in the catalog that I find very pretty. And this technique kind of lent itself well to that collection. So you'll see this in that upcoming class. So what I've got is I've got my pigment sprinkles. This is the Daffodil Delight one. And I'm just going to sprinkle a few sprinkles of that onto here. And now I'm going to spread it across my canvas, and see, I love, love, love this watercolor paint sprinkles beautifulness, and it just gives that kind of a nice variegated color. And then with the embossing paste, it gives it a bit of a variegated texture as well. And then we've got kind of that nice watercolor background with texture and all that coolness. So that you will see what I'm gonna do with later on. But super cool, hey, and super quick. So these pigment sprinkles, they come in a set of 6 different colors. You can kind of see them there, but I wanted to use the yellow for this. Okay, wiping my palette knife off again. Putting that aside. We're not done yet. We have still a bunch of techniques to go. So for this one, I'm gonna use a Night of Navy background. And I'm going to use this mask here. This is a really pretty mask. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to use just the regular embossing paste for this one. And I'm going to show you how to do a really neat technique. I guess we could call this double embossing. That's a good word. That's a good way to call it. Just going to use one of the different palette knives, give a little variety here. Doesn't matter which palette knife you use, whichever you're more comfortable with. Some of them are a little bit more springy than others. But they all do the trick. Some of them will work better for some stencils than others as well. For this one, I do want to fill that stencil in fairly completely, and you'll see why in a minute. This is one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite, one of these techniques. I'm putting a lot of effort into it, as you can tell. Okay, so we've got all of our bits filled in, I'm pretty sure, except where my finger just scraped some off. Okay, I'll lift this up. All right, so beautiful pattern. Love the white on the Night of Navy, but we can take it even a step further. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sprinkle this with gold embossing powder. So this is where that double embossing comes in. I'm going to do this in a few steps. Spilled embossing powder all over myself. That's okay, it's worth it. No use crying over spilled embossing powder, right? Okay, so I've got the extra embossing powder off of here, and now we're going to heat set this. This is where the magic happens. Get all this extra stuff off of here, and this is going to get loud, but it's worth it. All right. So it's starting to melt the embossing powder here. And at the same time, it's heating up the embossing paste as well. So it's kind of bubbling up and getting super puffy. So you can actually heat set embossing paste on its own as well. And it gets a little bit extra puffy as it melts and bubbles. But with the embossing powder on top, it's like super textured, super puffy. I don't even know how to describe this, but it's super cool. Alrighty. So that's all done. I'm gonna hold this up and see if you can see. See how it's like super puffy and it's got that beautiful shine on it from the embossing powder. This is just an amazing technique that adds so much texture. And it's such a different texture that we don't get from either embossing on its own or the embossing paste or the embossing powder on its own. It's just a really neat technique. All right, onwards and upwards. The next one I'm going to do onto a card base actually, because I'm gonna use this later on. So I want my, now I got embossing paste all over my fingers because I grabbed my microfiber in the wrong spot. This does get messy, and that's okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to use the regular embossing paste again, and I'm going to just get some onto this card front. It doesn't have to be, again, perfect. You don't need the whole card front. Just kind of some on there to create some texture. Alrighty, lift that up, perfect. That's exactly how I wanted that to turn out. Ha ha. Alright, now we're gonna heat set this again just because I want to speed it up a little bit. And you probably can't see it on there, on the video, but it does puff up as it dries. So it's a little puffier than if I was just using the embossing paste on its own. All right, so now I've got that on there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my shimmer paint, and I'm going to just kind of touch those raised areas with a little bit of shimmer paint. And I don't know how well that's showing up in the video, but in real life, it's adding a nice little shimmer to just the embossed areas that I'm hitting with the sponge dauber here. So that's a nice kind of subtle way to add a bit of shine without having to use the shimmery embossing powder. So put that aside. Oh, and now I've got shimmer paint all over my hands too. All right. Okay, the next technique is you can actually take little punched images like this and you can ice them. So you can use either the shimmery or the not shimmery, and you're just gonna ice this like you're icing a little cake. So that's a super cute way to make little 3D, whether they're cakes or you could do this with flowers, little clouds, and you're just adding some icing, for lack of a better term. And of course this is a cake, so that's fitting to that little punched image. And the more you try to get it perfect, the less perfect it's going to be. Sometimes you have to be happy with imperfect. Okay. There we go. We're almost done. The next technique that I have, and I'm going to do this on a small piece here because I don't need a big one, is we're going to stamp some trees. So this is just from the Winter Woods stamp set, and I'm going to stamp some trees on there. Look at that. Happy little trees. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a toothbrush and I'm going to add a little bit of snow to those trees. So just getting a little bit of this paste onto this toothbrush. I know this is not my actual toothbrush. I got one specifically for this. And we're just gonna, and whether you add more or less is totally up to you. How far down on the trees you go, all that kind of stuff you can kind of play with as you go. But this is a fun way to kind of add that snow look. And again, if you heat set this, it'll actually puff up a little bit and look even more like snow. So I hope you can see that in the video there. All right, last but not least, this is probably the messiest of all these techniques. There we go. Okay, so you're gonna take an embossing folder. And I would suggest you use an embossing folder that's not as difficult to clean as this one, or one that you don't mind kind of losing to this process, but it is a pretty cool technique. So for this one, you really only need a little bit of paste because you don't want to have too much. And you're going to rub it into your embossing folder. Now you want to make sure that you don't have any extra on the folder itself. You really just want it in those creases, like in the pattern. More apparently. Okay, I'm going to get all the extra kind of off of the other side. Okay, now we're going to take a piece of cardstock and we're going to lay it on there, and then just with our hands we're just going to squish that together. You don't have to run this through the actual die cutting machine. And now when you lift that out, it has kind of that pattern on there. Now, like I said, you want to wash this kind of as soon as possible. So I'm actually going to give it a wipe out with my microfiber and hopefully get the worst of it out. And then I'm probably going to end up soaking this with Goo Gone and all that fun stuff anyways. There we go. I got most of it out. All right. Whew, it's glittery from tip to tail. Okay, now we are actually done with our samples of the different techniques. So that was 9 different techniques that I just did in like 20 minutes. I know, speed stamper here. So what I want to show you now is how to put together the card. I've got a mostly clean spot here. So with this one, I'm going to take that card base that I made earlier and I'm going to fold it, and remember, always fold bump in and then use a bone folder to get that crease nice and sharp. Now we've got a bunch of pieces to go onto this card, and I've kind of cut them all out already. So the first piece that's going to go on is your ribbon. Now the easiest way to just attach a straight piece of ribbon like this is to very simply use tear and tape. You can cut tear and tape, but like the name suggests, you can also just tear it with your fingers. And then you can peel that off and put that ribbon wherever you want it. And that stuff holds really well, so you're not too worried about it coming off. All right, this is a frame that I made with that lovely die and embossing folder duo that I can't remember what it's called right now from the new annual catalog. And we're going to use glue dots to attach this. Now with this embossed texture, the glue dots actually don't show through very well, so that's good. We've got a bit more flexibility where we put them. They will show through a little bit, but they're a lot less noticeable than if you use just a regular vellum that hasn't been embossed. We're going to put that over the top there. Alrighty. This little heart frame is very thin and finicky, so it's going to be not quite as easy to adhere as if it was just a nice big one we could slap a few dimensionals on. So I'm using the liquid multi-purpose glue, and I'm just putting a very thin bead of glue along this frame, and that actually works really well to hold it off. Okay, we're going to put this over here. Smush it down. Okay, moving right along here. I've got my words. So I've got my little sentiment here, and I have my Rococo Rose ink pad. And I'm going to stamp that onto, oh, that wasn't very well stamped. Pushed way too hard. There we go, much nicer. All right, now I'm gonna just take my scissors, and I want this kind of in two little strips. So I'm gonna cut this with my scissors. And the easiest way to cut kind of a straightish line is actually to never let the scissors run all the way to the tip. So as soon as you close the scissors at the tip, they'll actually make a little hole there. So you want to kind of never quite get to the end. Ooh, everything's sticking to my fingers now. All right, get the little ends. Now with these, I had somewhere some mini dimensionals, and what I've done is I've snipped these edge pieces into thin strips, and that I found is the perfect size for these little sentiment strips. To pop them up onto dimensionals. This is really hard to do with sticky fingers. I should not have gotten embossing paste all over my fingers. All right, we're going to put that over a little heart there. Okay, now we do still have this little heart. Now I wanted to add a little bit of shine to it, so I'm going to use that shimmer paint and the sponge dauber again, and just run that all over my little die cut heart here, and that gives it a nice little shimmer to it without being like actual glimmer paper. Okay, now this is going to go on here with a dimensional. There we go. So when I first made this card, this is where I stopped, and because I can never have quite enough bling, I decided no, it needs some more bling. So I got out my sequins, which of course the woven thread sequins match perfectly with all the ink colors, including Rococo Rose, and I just got a few of these onto glue dots. The take your pick tool is really the greatest way to deal with sequins, because I don't know how else you could do this without that putty tip. This is just way too hard. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use these to kind of cover up where the glue dots are on my vellum. Then they'll be even less noticeable. See? There is those. And again, here I thought I was done. But then Kara had said, no, you know what, it needs something more. So I brought out my bird ballad trinkets, and in the first one I made, I added a little key, and this one I added the little sprig and a bow. And for this one, I think I'm just gonna add a little flower. So I'm not gonna add the linen thread bow to this one, I'm just gonna add the little flower. And now I'm done. So these are 3 different variants of this same card, just with different techniques in the background and the different little embellishment. And then I'll bring back some of our other techniques here as well. So this was similar to this one with the re-inkers in the background. This one here with the watercolor, crystals. Oh, and then we had our embossing powder on top. So there you go. So all of the supplies I used here are available to purchase in my online store, thecraftymedic.com. If you look on the right, there's a link to my store there, as well as the host code that you can use to get some extra goodies from me. And stay tuned to see what I make with these extra pieces I ended up, because I'm going to be posting those on my Facebook and my Instagram. That's all I've got for you today. Happy crafting. Stay in touch. Bye-bye.